Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Andrew and Marianne met 12 years ago at a mutual friend's party. Both shared a love of sports, healthy living, and the outdoors. It was the foundation of their marriage. Long hikes, morning runs together, laughing at silly movies in the evenings. But over the years, something began to change. Routines, tiredness, and loud arguments became more and more frequent in their relationship. Andrew noticed this, but didn't pay much attention. He thought it was temporary. Marianne, on the other hand, seemed increasingly detached. She started coming home from work later, spent more time at the gym, and one day, over dinner, suggested something that caught Andrew off guard. "I've been thinking about our marriage," she began, her eyes down on her plate of salad. "Yeah." Andrew looked up from the phone, not expecting anything special. "I think we need to try something new to revitalize the relationship. What do you think?" Andrew frowned. There was uncertainty in her voice. "Something new? I wonder what you mean?" Marianne took a deep breath. "I've read about it, and my clients at the gym have talked about open marriage too. Some couples practice it and say it helps bring back intimacy." Andrew stared at her, not believing his ears. "Are you serious? You want to go under my nose, dating other men?" She shook her head hastily. No, I'm not saying we have to do anything right away. Just think about it. It could be great for both of us. The freedom, the trust, and all that." Andrew couldn't find the words. He felt as if someone had knocked the ground out from under his feet. However, he was sure of one thing. He didn't want to lose Marianne. He had agreed because he loved her. Reluctantly, but he agreed, hoping it was just a phase that would pass soon. Marianne immediately perked up. After this conversation, she began to smile more, became more attentive to Andrew. But her activity outside the house also increased. She was spending more and more evenings with friends, attending workouts, and seemed content with her life. Andrew tried not to think about it, choosing to focus on work and his hobbies. A few months passed. Marianne was rushing to work. A sleepy Andrew watched as she hurriedly threw her gym bag on her shoulder and left her laptop turned on the kitchen table, hurrying to work. "Will you be back late?" Andrew asked, taking a sip of coffee. "Maybe," she tossed over her shoulder. "Depends on the workout." She ran out of the house, leaving no chance to continue the conversation. Andrew glanced at the laptop. Normally, Marianne never left it on. Curiosity compelled him to move closer. Lines of correspondence flashed on the screen. He wanted to turn it off, but something stopped his gaze. The title of the letter that had arrived in her inbox, "Plans for Okinawa." Andrew frowned. He hadn't realized Marianne was going on a trip. Okinawa? Why hadn't she said anything? His hand froze over the mouse, and then, in defiance of an inner voice warning of possible consequences, he clicked on the letter. The contents of the letter made his heart beat faster. It was a correspondence with a man named Kevin. Marianne was discussing the details of the trip: dates, hotels, activities. But it was the phrase that stuck with him the most. "I'm so glad we'll be able to spend this time, just the two of us." Andrew leaned back in his chair, feeling the tension throbbing in his head. Who was Kevin? He knew there was never any Kevin at that gym where she worked, and Marianne had never mentioned the name. His hands clenched into fists. He closed the laptop and tried to pull himself together. He remembered the open marriage arrangements, but he couldn't imagine her doing all this behind his back. Logic told him he should talk to Marianne, but something inside held him back. He realized that if he started questioning her now, she might just deny everything. Instead, he decided to proceed cautiously. The next day, Andrew arrived home unexpectedly early. His meeting with his clients had ended sooner than he had expected, and he decided to use the time he had left to rest quietly at home. As he stopped the car in the driveway, he noticed that the light in the living room was on, even though it was still early afternoon. Usually at this time, Marianne was either at work or at practice. This surprised him. As he entered the house, he heard the muffled sound of voices. At first, Andrew thought Marianne was on speakerphone, but the sound was too muffled. He took a few steps forward and stopped. The door to the office was closed, but from behind the thin walls, he could hear every word. "I'm just asking for a little time, Mr. Carlyle." Marianne's voice was quieter than usual and sounded uncertain. "Downsizing, it's a big problem for all of us." Andrew frowned. He knew that changes were underway at Marianne's fitness club, but she had never once mentioned that her position might be in jeopardy. You understand, Marianne. The man's voice was low, authoritative. The decision is almost made. But, of course, we could reconsider your case. Andrew felt his heart begin to beat faster. Reconsider the case? Flashed through his mind. He took a step closer, so he could hear better. I'm ready for anything, Mr. Carlyle. Literally anything. Marianne's words came quickly, as if she were afraid of changing her mind. There was silence for a moment. Andrew pressed himself closer to the door, trying to keep from rushing in at once. To everything? That's wonderful. Carlyle's voice was almost mocking. Good. Then meet me in my office tomorrow night. We'll discuss the details. I hope you know what I mean. Yes, I do, Mr. Carlyle. Thank you. Marianne's voice trembled. I won't let you down. Everything will be top-notch. The conversation ended. Andrew heard her press the call end button and took a deep breath. He backed away quickly, trying not to give away his presence. Holding his breath, he stood in the corner of the hallway until the office door opened. Marianne stepped out without noticing her husband and headed for the kitchen. Andrew followed her, trying to look natural. Andrew, are you home already? So early, she said in surprise, pouring herself some water. Yes, the meeting was canceled, he answered, trying to remain calm. Are you okay? You look tense. Just work. She looked away, pretending not to be bothered by the question. Andrew felt rage boiling in his chest, but he held back. Are you sure? Why don't you tell me what's going on at work? Nothing serious. Marianne waved her hand and quickly changed the subject. What about your work? Are the clients happy? She started talking about other things, carefully avoiding the subject that Andrew knew was on her mind. He pretended the conversation was over, but inside he was torn with questions. Who was this Mr. Carlyle? What kind of meeting did they have planned? And most importantly, how far would she be willing to go to save her seat? In the evening, Marianne went to work with the intention of meeting with Carlyle. Andrew walked her to the door, making sure there was no strain in his voice. Have a good evening, he said, kissing her on the cheek. Thank you. She smiled as if nothing was happening. When the door closed behind her, Andrew immediately picked up his phone and started searching for information about Mr. Carlyle from her conversations. Her boss, the man who made the key decisions. After 5 minutes of searching, he found the company page and Carlyle's profile. The photo was of a man in his 50s, in an expensive suit with a confident smile. Andrew felt something inside him clench. He was sure he couldn't just sit idly by. Andrew decided to follow Marianne. He parked near a fitness center and waited. Around 8 p.m., the light in one of the offices on the top floor was still on. He noticed Marianne in the windows of that office. A few minutes later, her supervisor Carlyle walked in. For 10 minutes they discussed something, and then the setting began to resemble a scene from an adult movie. They began playfully touching each other. Marianne stroked her boss in various places, but after a few minutes the blinds came down, hiding what was going on inside. Andrew was overcome with despair and anger. He sat in the car, but he couldn't calm down. He sat in the dark interior for a few minutes, mulling over what was happening. We agreed to an open marriage, he reminded himself, even though those words seemed foreign and meaningless to him. The arrangement was his attempt to preserve their relationship, but he hadn't expected her to take advantage of it in this way, with the man who held her career in his hands. He wondered if he should go into the building. But what would he say? The scene wouldn't help. If Marianne is willing to do something like this, talking clearly won't fix their situation anymore. Andrew decided it was best to maintain control. When Marianne got home, Andrew was already sitting in the living room with his laptop, pretending to be busy working. He felt a wave of emotion rising in his chest again, but forced himself to remain calm. You're late, he said, taking his eyes off the screen. Yeah, I got held up at work. She tossed her bag on the table and smiled. We were discussing plans for downsizing. I don't think this downsizing will affect me. Andrew nodded, watching her facial expressions carefully. She sounded confident, but there was something insincere in her smile. How about you? She asked to divert his attention. Everything's going according to plan. The work is going well. The clients are happy, he replied, rising from the couch. Are you sure you're okay? You look tired. It's just been a long day, and these redundancy talks have really worn me out, she replied briefly, and without giving him a chance to continue, she headed for the shower. Later that night, when Marianne was asleep, Andrew lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts swirled in his head. Their open marriage contract implied honesty, but she hadn't told him about her travel intentions and negotiations with her boss. She'd chosen to hide it all. Why? He realized there was a crack in their relationship that was growing wider and wider. And if he wanted to keep his family together, he would have to dig deeper. The next morning, Andrew suggested they have breakfast together, just like old times. "It's been a long time since we've had a real conversation," he began, pouring them coffee. "How are you doing? What's new?" Marian looked at him carefully, as if trying to figure out where he was going with this. "I'm fine, honey. Just a lot of work, she shrugged. "How's your boss doing?" Andrew tried to sound casual, but he noticed her face tense up a little. "Carlisle?" She took a sip of coffee. "It's business as usual. There's a lot of stress right now with the layoffs. But he and I have become close lately, and I've been supporting him through this difficult time. So, I shouldn't worry? You have everything under control?" He raised an eyebrow. She nodded, but didn't continue the conversation. Andrew decided not to press her, so as not to arouse suspicion. He realized this morning that their open marriage was not just an experiment, but a life-shattering test. But he was ready to find out just how far Marianne had gone in her games with Carlisle and Kevin, and what it meant for their marriage. Several days passed. Andrew was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, and suddenly his phone vibrated. It was a text message from an unknown number. Opening it, he read, "I don't know if I should be writing this, but your wife is not as easy as she seems. Perhaps you should find out what's going on behind your back." The message burned his eyes. He stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to comprehend what he was reading. Then, before he had time to think, he sent a reply. "Who are you? Why are you writing this to me?" The reply came almost instantly. "I'm one of her clients. Saw her with her friend Kevin. They seem to have more than a friendship." Andrew felt the blood run cold in his veins. Kevin? Him again? It was a name he'd heard before in her correspondence about her trip to Okinawa. He tried to keep his cool, but everything was boiling inside. He quickly wrote, "Are you sure? What exactly did you see?" There was no reply. Andrew sent another text, but the phone remained silent. Andrew realized he had to act quickly and decisively. He found a private investigator on the internet with good reviews. His name was Thomas White. After a brief conversation, they arranged to meet at a cafe to discuss the details. When Andrew entered the establishment, Thomas was already sitting at a table in the corner, with a laptop and notepad in front of him. He looked like a man who had seen too much and had learned not to be surprised by anything. "Andrew?" Thomas clarified, rising for a handshake. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for taking the time." They sat down, and Andrew laid out his problem without preamble. "My wife, Marianne. I don't understand who she is. At first she proposed an open marriage, but I have my suspicions that it's for a reason. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I want to find out. I need proof." Thomas nodded, jotting down the information in his notebook. "You mentioned the name Kevin on the phone. What do you know about him?" "They work together at the same gym," Andrew explained. "I'm not sure how close they are, but from some reports, it seems like there's more than a working relationship between them." "Okay, I'll start with her schedule and see who she's seeing outside the house. That could take a few days. Do you have any pictures of her or any other data that might help?" Andrew handed him some pictures of Marianne and a picture he'd found on Kevin's profile. "One important clarification," Thomas added. "Are you sure you want to know the truth? Sometimes what we find out changes everything." "I have to know the truth. I'm ready for it now," Andrew said firmly. 3 days passed before Thomas contacted him again. They met at the same cafe. The detective looked pensive, which immediately alerted Andrew. "I have something for you," Thomas began, opening his laptop. "Your suspicions were well-founded." He unfolded the screen, showing several photographs. One showed Marianne and Kevin standing side by side by her car, laughing. Another photo showed them entering what appeared to be Kevin's apartment. Andrew felt his heart clench. "That was 2 days ago," Thomas explained. But that wasn't all. He flipped through a few more pictures. They showed Marianne sitting in a cafe with another man. They were holding hands. "Who's that?" Andrew asked in a husky voice. "His name is Mike Rivers. They met after her work. Apparently, he's one of her clients, too." Andrew froze, feeling anger and resentment rising in a wave. Her open marriage had turned into a one-sided game. She had violated the most important condition, honesty. Thomas continued, "You have all the evidence. I can continue the surveillance if you wish, but from the looks of it, the situation is clear." Andrew nodded slowly. He didn't need any further proof. Now he knew what to do. That night he sat in the kitchen for a long time with a glass of whiskey in his hand. Marianne came home late, citing delays at the hall. She kissed him on the cheek and went upstairs, not noticing him clenching his fist to contain his anger. Andrew watched her athletic silhouette lurking outside the bedroom door and felt the moment to act had arrived. He wanted to hear the truth from Marianne, but realized that just asking questions was pointless. She would dodge, cover up, or worse, twist the situation to make him look guilty. A direct conversation, however, was inevitable. All that was left was to prepare for it and pretend to accept it. The evening was not chosen at random. Marianne returned from work when Andrew had already prepared dinner. At the table he looked calm, even a little distant. She noticed this, but said nothing. It was her style to avoid unpleasant topics if they could be hushed up. This time, however, Andrew wasn't about to give her that opportunity. "We need to talk," he began as they cleared the table. "About what?" Her voice sounded casual, but he caught the subtle tension in her eyes. "About us." He sat down across from her, interlocking his fingers. "I don't think our marriage is working anymore. Do you feel that?" Marianne froze for a moment, then carefully set her wine glass on the table. She didn't look surprised, more like cautious. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice too flat to be sincere. "You know what I mean. We tried to preserve our alliance, introduced the concept of open marriage. But I don't think it's working. I feel like we've become too far apart." Marianne looked at him carefully, as if trying to see how serious he was. Then she sighed. "Yes, you're probably right. It's been hard on both of us." Andrew pretended to be surprised by her agreement. He'd expected resistance, excuses, but instead she'd agreed right away. It only reinforced his suspicions. "I think we should take a break," he continued. "Separate for a while. Try to figure out what we want." Marianne nodded thoughtfully, avoiding his gaze. "It might actually be helpful for both of us," she said after a pause. Her tone was too light. There was not a drop of regret, not a shadow of doubt. Andrew felt rage boiling up inside him, but he forced himself to smile. "Then it's settled. I'll stay here, and you can find a place for yourself." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Sure, I can stay at a friend's house for a while." Andrew knew she was lying. The friend was probably her boyfriend, Kevin. She had already planned it all out and was ready for this turn of events. Over the next few days, Marianne began to prepare for the move. She packed her things, packed her gym clothes, and even took some of her makeup away. All the while, she remained calm, as if the move was just a formality. Andrew watched her with a concerned look, but inside, everything was boiling. He already knew her lies would be exposed, and he would make sure of it. Marianne moved out on Friday night. She said goodbye easily, without too much emotion. "Call me if you need anything," she said as she left the house. "Sure," he answered. His voice sounded steady, without a hint of suspicion. As soon as the door closed behind her, Andrew sat on the couch, staring at the door. He gave himself a few moments to catch his breath, then pulled out his cell phone. He dialed Detective Thomas's number. She was gone. "Now let's get started," he said briefly. Thomas already knew what to do. The detective had been assigned to follow Marianne and record anything that could prove she was lying. Andrew didn't just want to find out the truth. He wanted her to confess it herself when he had irrefutable evidence. Thomas acted quickly. Within 2 days, he informed Andrew that Marianne was staying with Kevin. They were spending time together, going out to the restaurant and working out at the gym. Thomas took pictures, recording their movements. One day, he even recorded their conversation as they discussed how everything worked out well with the temporary breakup. Andrew got this evidence and began to make his plan. He decided that he would not press charges against her right away. Instead, he would wait for the right time to turn things around in his favor. On the 3rd day, Marianne called him. "How are you?" Her voice sounded animated. "I'm okay. Working, taking care of the house. And you? How's your friend?" He pretended not to know. "She's fine. She's happy to have me. It helps me, Clear my head, she said. Andrew grinned, but her words only added fuel to the fire. He knew things were about to change, and he was ready for it. Andrew hung up the phone and looked at the pictures Thomas had sent him. One of them showed Marianne and Kevin sitting in his car laughing. He knew that their time on pause was coming to an end, but he would be the one to decide how and when this game would end. A few days later, Andrew was already sitting in his car across the street from the gym where Marianne and Kevin worked. In his hands, he held a folder of evidence of her cheating and manipulation that he had collected over the past weeks. Photos, notes, screenshots of correspondence. He was waiting for Kevin. He was due to finish his shift in 10 minutes, and Andrew knew he wouldn't be able to avoid the conversation. Everything was churning inside. Anger, resentment, but also a strange sense of relief. Everything was coming to a finale. A few minutes later, Kevin walked out of the building, carrying a gym bag over his shoulder. He looked confident. To Andrew, he got out of the car and crossed the parking lot. Kevin, he called out. The man turned around, first surprised, then frowning. Andrew, huh? He asked, clearly not expecting to see him. What are you doing here? We need to talk, Andrew said, nodding towards the nearest cafe. It's important. Kevin hesitated, but nodded. They walked into the cafe and took a table in the corner. Andrew tossed a folder on the table. It's all about Marianne, he said, sitting down across from them. Kevin frowned, but didn't touch the folder. Look, if you want to talk about your problems with her, I'm not interested, he said irritably. You're wrong. They're not my problems. They're yours. Open the folder. Kevin reluctantly took the folder and began to look through the contents. The pictures of him and Marianne together were first, but next were screenshots of her correspondence with Mr. Carlisle and Mike Rivers. Kevin read several of the messages carefully. His face changed. First it was surprise, then anger. What is this? He asked, dropping the folder on the desk. It's what you need to know about Marianne. She uses people. You, me, her boss. All of them. She lied to me about you, just like she lied to you about her job. All this time, she's been dating everyone, pretending she cares about each and every one of us. And you're not the only one. Kevin was silent, his eyes darting over the documents, as if he was hoping to find something to refute Andrew's words. That's bullshit. She's not like that. We love each other, he finally said, but his voice shook. Do you really think she's being honest with you? Andrew leaned closer, his voice lower. Did she tell you why she met with Carlisle? That she agreed to sleep with him to save her job? Kevin turned pale. He slowly closed the folder and stared at the desk. She said her job was in jeopardy, he muttered. But I thought it was just talk. Shit. Andrew could see Kevin's confidence fading before his eyes. But he decided to finish him off. She planned her life without you. You think she'd stay with you if she found someone better? You're a convenient option for her, nothing more. Kevin stood up abruptly, his face flaming with anger. I have to talk to her. Immediately. Do that, Andrew replied calmly, rising. But be prepared for what you'll hear. And one more thing. When she starts making excuses, remember that the person in front of you is the person who has already deceived us all. Marianne returned to Kevin's apartment toward evening. She was in a good mood, looking forward to a quiet dinner and perhaps a relaxing evening. But as she opened the door, she felt tension in the air. Kevin was sitting on the couch, his face grim. Hi, she said, dropping her bag. Everything okay? We need to talk, he said briefly. She froze, her smile gone. About what? She asked cautiously. Kevin picked up the folder he'd brought with him from the cafe. About this. Marianne turned pale when she saw the folder. She quickly reached over and snatched it from his hands, opening it at random. Her eyes raced over the photos, the correspondence, and she realized that everything had come to light. Where did you get this? Her voice trembled. It doesn't matter, he replied. What matters is that it's all true, isn't it? Carlisle, Andrew, the other men. You lied to me, to everyone around you, and I want to know why. I did it for us, for our future. I was just trying to, she started making excuses. For us? Are you out of your mind? His voice boomed. You've been going over people's heads, deceiving people, using me, all for us? Don't make me laugh. Marianne stepped toward him, trying to hug him, but he pulled away sharply. Get out of here, you slut, he shouted. Now, and don't come back. But where would I go? Her voice became pleading. That's not my problem anymore. Marian sat in her car by the side of the road for a long time. She didn't know where to go. The world she had worked so hard to build was crumbling. Kevin had kicked her out. The job was on the line. She felt like she was losing everything she had. But there was one thought in her mind, one name, Andrew. His calmness and kindness. His willingness to always support her, even when she asked for the impossible. I can fix this, she thought. The solution came instantly. She started the car and headed toward their house. No, toward his house. Andrew heard the sound of the engine in the driveway. It was unexpected. He wasn't expecting guests. Getting up from the couch, he went to the window and saw Marian getting out of the car. She looked worried, almost lost. Andrew felt a wave of anger rising inside, but he forced himself to breathe steady. Let's see what she wants, he thought. He opened the door before she could knock. Her eyes met his, filled with tears she wasn't even trying to hide. Andrew, darling, she began in a trembling voice. Can I come in? He nodded silently, stepping aside so she could pass. Marian entered, turned to him and froze, as if she didn't know where to begin. I know you probably don't want to see me, she said, her voice full of desperation. But I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. I've lost everything. Kevin kicked me out, Carlisle cheated on me, and now my job is in jeopardy. I was wrong. All this time I thought I was looking for something I was missing, but everything I needed was right here. It was you. You were always the one who cared for me, loved me. Please give me another chance. Andrew stood across from her, arms crossed over his chest. His face remained impassive, but everything was boiling inside. He let her finish without interrupting, even though every word she said cut to the core. When she was silent, he inhaled slowly and said, Do you really want me to believe that this is sincere? That you suddenly realized you loved me because everything else fell apart? I can see it's not remorse, Marianne. It's fear of being alone. You came here because you have nowhere else to go. She froze, not expecting him to say it to her face. That's not true. Her voice rose, but it was no longer confident. I realized I made a mistake. I was stupid. I lost my bearings, but I want to make it right. I want to go home. Home? He grinned, his voice full of sarcasm. Don't you even realize that this place stopped being your home a long time ago? Home is a place where people respect and appreciate each other. And you, Marianne? You lied to me, cheated on me, slept with another man under the pretense of our open marriage, which you proposed. And now you want me to pretend like nothing happened? Her eyes filled with tears. I know I was wrong. I'll do anything to make it right. I'm sorry, Andrew. Andrew shook his head. No, Marianne. You can't fix this. You ruined everything we had. And worst of all, you didn't even try to save it. You used me like you used Kevin, like you used Carlisle, and the others. You always put your own interests first. And I was too in love with you to notice. He walked to the door and opened it. Go away, he said quietly but firmly. I don't want to see you anymore. Andrew, please, she began, but he held up his hand to stop her. I've said everything. There's no place for you here anymore. Find yourself another home, another life. She stared at him for a few seconds, her face gray, as if she had given up hope. Then she turned and walked slowly out of the threshold. Andrew closed the door as soon as her silhouette was out of sight. He stood in silence, feeling strangely relieved. This was the end of their marriage, of their lies, of her manipulations. Now he could start over, on his own terms. It had been 6 months since Marianne had walked out of Andrew's life. It had been 6 months full of change, overcoming and finally finding peace. Andrew had moved into a new house, selling the old one to get rid of the memories associated with the past years. It was a spacious, bright house in the suburbs, where you could hear birds singing in the morning instead of cars honking. His career progression had taken off. After several successful deals, he was promoted to team leader at a large marketing company. He had the opportunity to focus on his future, forgetting the pain he had endured from his broken marriage. One warm summer evening, Andrew decided to go to a corporate event organized by his company. It was a garden party for one of his colleagues. Andrew had always tried to avoid such events, preferring quieter activities, But this time he felt it was time to break out of his comfort zone. When he entered the garden, he was immediately greeted by the sound of laughter and the pleasant scent of flowers. Colleagues smiled at him in greeting. Andrew held himself with confidence. Although deep down, he still felt the slight insecurity that came from his breakup with Mary Ann. It was here that he had met her, Emily. She was a friend of one of his co-workers and had come to the event almost by accident. Emily was unlike any woman he had known before. Her simplicity and sincerity immediately caught his attention. She wasn't trying to impress, but her smile and genuine inquisitiveness made Andrew feel comfortable. They got to talking, first about work, then about books, movies, and travel. "I rarely go to parties like this," she admitted with a smile. "But I'm glad I came." "Are you?" "I usually avoid such events too," he answered, smiling lightly. "But sometimes a change is what's needed." Their conversation continued throughout the evening. Andrew felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was with someone he felt at ease with. As Emily was about to leave, he made up his mind. "Why don't we continue this conversation over a cup of coffee?" he asked, a little worried. She smiled. "I'd love to." Their first meeting over coffee was the beginning of something new. Emily proved to be a person who could listen, understand, and not judge. Her interest in life and positive attitude inspired Andrew. They began to spend more time together, and he realized that he was slowly returning to a life he thought he had lost. He was now focused on his future. His relationship with Emily continued to grow. She brought a lightness and joy to his life that he hadn't felt in a long time. They traveled together, made plans, and one evening, sitting by the campfire, Andrew realized that for the first time in a long time he felt truly happy. The past was behind him, and he never looked back. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.